Yes, so welcome everyone to our second session of the executive program HSBC Metabase Q. Thank you for joining. We're super excited about today's conversation with Matt DeVost and Dan Regalado, two of the experts and gurus on a topic like today, which is critical: how to think like an attacker. You know, I think a lot of the times we're thinking about cybersecurity, and it's one of those things that it's never going to happen to us. But I think we always need to be ready and alert to see how or when it would happen. So we're super excited and thrilled to be partnered with the HSBC on this amazing series of conversations. And today, thinking like an attacker, which is what most people in the attack side think about. We're going to be hearing some insights from Matt and Dan. But before we start, Carlos, go ahead, and looking forward to kicking off this session.
Thank you, Mauricio. I adhere to your comments. A pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for our clients, stakeholders, and partners to join us in this fantastic seminar and having the opportunity to talk with two of the world's most knowledgeable people around the cyber security industry. So with no more than that, let's kick off. And this session is very relevant because, as everybody knows, one of the key things when you're talking about how to defend your company is to make sure that you know the incentives and how to think like an attacker. So with that, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Daniel. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Carlos. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start describing a little bit of an approach that I would like to recommend, and then I think Matt is going to follow me on his great recommendations also. So I think like when we talk about thinking like an attacker, I think we all in the cybersecurity industry understand a little bit the concept, you know, like thinking like an attacker to anticipate the enemy and to try to, you know, act like those guys in order to find bugs proactively, to find issues in your organization. I think that's something that in theory is understood, but how do you approach it in your organization? I think that's the challenge. And I would like to give you an example of that. So normally today, we think about finding vulnerabilities in our organizations in order for us to patch them. If you think about your house, for example, you can hire someone, he will come in, find different ways in order to break into your house. At the end of the day, he's gonna give you a report and he's gonna say probably that he was able to break in through the front door because he unlocked the locker, and he might be able to break in through a right side window on your house. So what you do after that is you go and patch those two things, and that's it. Then you wait for the next assessment, or actually you wait for the attacker to try to break into your house until you realize that probably there are many other ways to break into your house. So this cat and mouse approach that you see, so we're doing right on thinking like an attacker, because as you noticed, so you are trying to find ways, or as an attacker is thinking, in order to find those ways to break into your house. However, the approach is not actually the best, because you are in the cat and mouse game where you are always patching after finding vulnerabilities. So here is where I think comes down to one of the main points on how you approach it. What if instead of doing this finding and patching exercises, you focus on identifying before that even happened? And that comes down to a specific term that I like to always express. We need to realize that sooner or later, we're going to be compromised. We all here in this session knows that sooner or later, we're going to be compromised. We are not here to say, I'm secure and no one is going to compromise my organization. So we think about that. Probably we can focus on what is called a little bit of a technical term, indicators of attacks and indicators of compromise. Let's go back to the house, right? Someone is trying to break into your house. He doesn't even is successful yet, but you realize that he's doing multiple attempts, and you are actually detecting those attempts. Those are the indicators of attacks. That's before even being compromised. If you take your organization to that approach, into detecting and monitoring to these different attempts, you are one step forward, because that means you are not even compromised, but you are already detecting, monitoring, and responding. The second part is you're going to be compromised sooner or later. So you better respond as soon as possible to those scenarios, which is called the indicators of compromise, so that you can obviously lower down the impact in your organization. And then finally, this combination of indicators of attack and compromise comes down to what we call, in the industry calls, the time to detect and time to respond. Meaning how fast your company, time to detect means how fast your company realized they have been compromised from the moment that the attacker was able to bring into the organization. And second is how fast, once you realize you're compromised, your response, you eradicate that attack. So if you take your organization to lowering down in a recurring way those times so that you can detect faster and respond faster, I think that's going to be a huge improvement. And then if we compare these two approaches, you are not patching all the time as soon as you find something, but you rather find ways, indicators of attacks, indicators of compromise, signs that someone is pretending to break into your organization, and then you lower down those times to detect and time to respond. And before giving the word to Matt, another very important point is the regional-based attackers, right? Because we think about this whole mindset of an attacker, but I don't really care about any specific actors compromising Asia or compromising Europe, right? You need to think about how the attackers are compromising Mexico, how they are compromising Latin America, because those techniques are totally different. Technically speaking, might be similar, but the way they approach, the way they knock the door, the way they want to compromise is regional, totally regional. So you really want to also focus on tropicalize these scenarios into your organization. I think that's my first take. So please, Matt, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So when I think about thinking like an attacker, and this is something that I've incorporated into my career for over 25 years, I guess since 1995, is really to help us better understand how to manage cyber risk. I think what many people often forget is that if you are in business, you are in the business of managing risks. And that might be risks from competitors. It might be risks based on environmental, political factors. It might be risks based on availability of workforce. Yet when we think about cyber risk, we tend to think about it differently. We have all of these technologies. We have these globally interconnected networks. And people tend to forget that cyber risk is a risk that can be managed within the business. By thinking like the attacker, we're establishing kind of a mental model for understanding what the impact would be of vulnerabilities that might be exploited against us and what the attackers are trying to accomplish in targeting us. I always like to remind folks that your attacker is not a 1 or a 0. It's not information on a wire. There is a living, breathing human being that is sitting behind the keyboard on the other end. That human being is attacking your organization because they have an objective that they're trying to achieve. And if you can understand the objectives that you're trying to achieve, you can better understand how to manage cyber risk within your organization. And that comes into play in a couple of different ways. First, from an assessment perspective, as Dan had mentioned, the adversary emulation, you're able to go and emulate how a real attacker trying to accomplish a particular goal is going to view your organization. And that impacts the attack type that they lead with. It dictates the decisions that they make while they're compromising your network. It dictates how stealthy and evasive they're going to be. So it's good to have that perspective where you are basically subjecting yourself to testing that emulates the attacker capability. The analogy I always like to use here is that if you were in a boxing match, say against Mike Tyson, famous boxer, and they say, Matt, you and Mike have to fight, and you need to train for the fight. Well, our typical model in cybersecurity is I would go train by just hitting a punching bag. And that's great. I'm learning how to punch, I'm learning how to move. But to really understand how to box Mike Tyson, I'm going to want to box against a human sparring partner. I'm going to want somebody who can emulate Mike Tyson, who can move when I move and counter move, right? It's not a static problem. So when we engage in these cyber assessments and adversary emulations, we want to engage a team that can act like a sparring partner. If our team feels like they have the ability to detect a certain type of attack, how do we, escape that? How do we prevent detection? How do we figure out what the attack tree looks like as people go further down in the organization? But more so, it helps us understand what is critical to our own organization. Understanding if an attacker is targeting us, why are they trying to target us? And if the why is something that would be catastrophic or consequential, then obviously we need to focus more investment, more resources on preventing those types of attacks from happening. The other interesting aspect of this is that if you think like an attacker, it allows us to remove some of the artificial constraints that typically exist when we do security testing. And we all see these constraints in the industry every day. You can only test me using a certain type of tool. I don't want you to impact my company, so I only want you to attack me between 11 p.m. and 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't want you to exploit this vulnerability if you find it on my internal network, because I already know I'm vulnerable, so I don't need you to point that out. Really, when you adopt a mindset of thinking like an attacker, you are also removing some of those artificial constraints. And I always like to remind executives and boards when I brief them that when you're engaging in this threat-centric attack modeling, that you don't want to put constraints on the red team, the folks that are conducting the testing for you, that you can't also put on the attacker. I can't tell an attacker trying to target my bank or trying to target my manufacturing line that they can only attack me between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. I can't tell them that they cannot attack me on Christmas Eve or another holiday, right? So we need to remove those artificial constraints as well. I had an interesting experience that guided my principles in this back in the mid-90s when I was doing cyber red teaming for the US Department of Defense, and I encountered a retired military general who was doing red teaming with conventional military forces. And in this red team, they had US and coalition tanks and jeeps and airplanes, and then they gave this retired general some tanks and some jeeps and some airplanes, and they were, with simulated munitions, actually engaging in an attack in a particular region, obviously not with real weapons or real munitions. And one of the interesting things is this retired general went and got aluminum foil and mylar balloons, and he made his tanks have this electronic signature of, or he made his jeeps have an electronic signature of a tank. And he used that to maneuver, and the US forces responded, and then he took his real tanks and flanked. And they immediately declared and said, wait a minute, you can't do this. You made your jeeps look like tanks. That's not possible. And he looked at the opposing general and he said, what, the attacker can't buy aluminum foil and mylar balloons, right? We can't impose these artificial constraints. So the last example that I'll give as to why thinking like an attacker is valuable is when we do get compromised. And Dan mentioned that we have to assume as modern organizations that there's a presumption of breach. We have to recognize that at some point an attacker is going to be successful. And what we're trying to do is minimize the impact of that successful attack. But if you understand what an attacker is trying to accomplish when they're targeting you, your response to that incident can be that much more efficient. And I'm sure we'll be sharing some war stories in that regard as well. But understanding the attacker mindset is also important, not just in red teaming, but in dictating how you respond once you are attacked.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much. And I think that also following it, what Matt is saying, if you think about that mindset, it doesn't matter if you are touching your infrastructure, your cloud, your backend, your POS, if you have point of sale systems, your web front end, your mindset is different now, because basically it doesn't matter the assessment that you are doing. You always are obviously thinking like an attacker with the team that you are hiring, but also measuring every single time if you are capable to detect, if you are capable to monitor, if you are capable to respond. Every single exercise you do in your organization comes down to the point to, a typical case that everyone knows, right? I had someone to assess my web pages, and probably the companies are taking 3-4 days trying to break into this organization, but maybe they have given a lot of signs before breaking in. Are we able to detect those signs, which, as you remember, we call indicators of attack? So, because those normally organizations get the report at the end, but those indicators before that even happen, we want to make sure that we are able to see and we are able to detect and to respond. Keep in mind that you cannot protect what you cannot see. You must first have visibility across your organization, and after that, you can come up with some strategies to detect and respond, detect and respond, detect and respond. Another thing that I want to also point out is knowledge sharing, guys. I mean, attackers, they team up, you know, they share exploits, they share strategies, they actually, different threat actors share infrastructure, they share different techniques. But what happened with us, and this is not only in Mexico and Latin, this is all worldwide, is very hard for us to share knowledge. You know, if someone compromised me, that doesn't mean I'm gonna give you the records they took over, but it's more about the potential signs, the different techniques that another organization can take and protect proactive way. So I think that's another thing that as organizations, we need to start thinking like attackers. We need to share knowledge in our side. And that's something that Matt obviously knows very well about those things in the organization. But at the end of the day, if we're able to also share knowledge for us as an organizations to spread the word about different ways latest attackers are doing in the region, I think that will also come down into a better and more secure place. I have another point here. Well, Matt, do you wanna add something?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of different things that I'll add from a perspective that are based on questions that I often get. And one is, you know, how do we convey this work that we're doing and thinking like an attacker to executive teams, and in particular to boards of directors? Because if you haven't noticed, there can often be a gap between the cybersecurity professionals entrusted with protecting the network and the executive leadership. And if you take a threat-centric approach to how you think about security, it allows you to articulate to these management teams a little bit more clearer. And let me give you an example. And I was guilty of this early in my career, where I would go and brief a board of directors around an assessment that we conducted. And I would say we found 50 high-level vulnerabilities, and we found 75 medium, and we found 100 low vulnerabilities. And the next quarter you go in and you say, well, now we're down to 45 high-level vulnerabilities. And the board would ask, so have we reduced our risk? Like, how, you know, what does that mean from a risk management perspective? It's a very difficult question to answer because we haven't provided the business context or the business impact. If you think like an attacker and you have teams that are engaging in attacker or adversary emulation, that conversation is much more different. I can go into the board at a bank and I can say, we believe, based on our regional threat intelligence and what is happening to our peers and the sharing that Dan is talking about, plus what we're seeing, that the most likely attacker against our organization is a sophisticated cyber criminal. And they're going to target us because they're going to try and engage in financial fraud and steal money from the organization. As a result, from that perspective, here is the attack surface that we saw. Here are the vulnerabilities that exist. Here are the ones that we exploited. Here are the decisions that we made. Here is what we were able to accomplish. You know, we accessed financial systems, we were able to engage in fraud. And then here's how quickly we were or were not detected. Now, here are the steps that we're taking in order to reduce that attack surface and make sure that an attacker can't find that attack pathway. You've provided real context because they understand. If I tell a bank I was able to steal 10 million out of the bank, they understand what that means. If I say it was undetected, they understand that that 10 million could be 100 million or 500 million. And if I come in and say, well, a quarter ago, it took you 6 days to detect our attack. And this time it took you 6 hours. You have actually improved your risk within that organization substantially because you've reduced the attacker's time on your network. You've more quickly detected them. And I can tell you personally, and I'm sure, Dan, that your experiences are the same, that the less time that I have actively on a network, the less that I'm able to accomplish. So reducing that time to detection, improving the efficiency of the response is important. Let me just point out one other piece that I think that's important. So let's say that you bring in somebody like Dan and they engage in an attack emulation and they find some vulnerabilities and you remediate them. And then most organizations think, well, I'm done. I've looked at my network from the perspective of a sophisticated cyber criminal. I don't need to do it again. What we need to remember is that attackers are motivated to innovate and figure out new ways to attack you. So the role of the red team now becomes to think about, how do I out-innovate the attacker? How do I figure out what they will do next before the attacker is able to accomplish it? This requires you to start thinking about security in a different context. I'll give you just kind of one fun example with one of my teams years ago, where we were conducting an assessment for a very large casino property. And obviously we'd been doing these recurring assessments, we'd found these attack surfaces, and we're looking at ways in which we would innovate if we were an attacker. So the guys started walking around the casino. And one thing that they noticed was that at an escalator, there was a network jack. And there was a network jack because that escalator was intended to be connected to a network in order to monitor the flow of people and the operation of that escalator. It turned out that that network jack was connected into the corporate network behind the firewall, was accessible to the general public. So they just plugged a simple device in there that allowed us to access the network persistently, right? They thought like an attacker now, thinking, okay, we feel pretty confident from a cyber attack perspective. What if we blend a physical and cyber? What does the exposure look like? And you can rinse and repeat that not only for cyber ways to attack your organization, but physical and a blended physical component as well. And even more sophisticated mechanisms like supply chain and how secure is your software and your hardware supply chain in these technology environments.
Thanks, Matt. Also, one point very, very important, Tim, is that normally there's another approach that we need to change our mindset. Normally, if you think about it, you hire some externals or your internal red team, and you tell as an organization, okay, so you do black box. You know, we have this sense of black box, and I'm not gonna tell you anything, but we've missed one very important point, guys. Attackers has all the time and all the resources. They might be 6 months exploring your organization until they find a way to break in, until they take screenshots like Carvanac, as you might remember, these guys that are very successful in the financial industry. So these guys has all the time, all the resources, fully dedicated, and then they will eventually find their way. They find the right person to social engineer. They find the right way to break in, take screenshots for months, decide what is this specific system that they want to target, and eventually they have a motivation, they have a clear target to break into the organization. And when you hire people, you are like, hey, this is black box, you find your way. And what happened normally is another story that I also want to share is we wanted to convince the customer to have this specific scenario to think about a target, you know, because every single organized crime, APT, advanced persistent threats, they have a target. They won't just throw emails and think like, if someone clicked on it and I infected, let me see what I can do. No, they already know the full motivation and target why they are going against you. The same thing need to happen in your exercises, because then that way you have a chance to focus the team in the limited time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They will limit their efforts into something that you know is going to hurt you. What happens if at the end of the exercise you don't give them context, and then you have a 48-page report where you have SNMP issues, which is fine. I mean, great, you have SNMP issues, great, you have router related stuff, but guess what? Your settlement server, that is your whole main important asset in your organization, was never touched because there were no motivation, there were no target in the exercise. So these 3 weeks, the people were focused on finding a way to break into a router or jump into another segment, whatever. But the target, the motivation was not clear set. And then you just waste your time, because at the end, it's good, as I said, it's good to have those different findings, but better to focus on what you really know your company is gonna be really, really hurt and probably be out of business if someone is able to get and compromise those specific assets. So at the end of the day, I think it's very also important to give context to these specific exercises, so that team can focus on this limited time on what you know is going to hurt you if they are able to succeed in the exploitation. And last but not least, what Matt mentioned, very important, threat intelligence, local threat intelligence. 2 weeks ago, the week ago, there was a group called Raccoon. I don't know you guys heard about it. Raccoon, Ukrainian team, they are compromising everywhere. They are in LATAM, they are stealing VPN credentials. It's another way to break in. Keep in mind that most of the attacks today, especially in banks, is not like I am compromised the web front end and then from there moving to DNC and laterally. I mean, that's, yeah, it can happen, but normally these days you have 20 security controls watching. So these infiltrations is something, a very common way to do. So these groups, local groups like Raccoon that I was telling you, you gotta make sure that you have a threat intelligence team feeding you those actors, their motivations, their ways to break into your organization. And those are the ones that you really want to replicate in your organization. Again, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, you don't want to replicate actors that are finding their ways to break in Europe or other places. You want to make sure that the ways you assess your organization are exactly the way these guys are doing it successfully in the region.
So thanks, Dan. All good points, and I agree. You know, the threat context is very important. I mentioned that you can also use threat thinking like an attacker to frame how to respond to an incident. And I'll share a story that's an exemplar of that. We were brought in at one point to help a company with an investigation, and when they reached out, they said, we have an insider, so we have an employee of the company who is engaging in bad activity, and we want you to come in and run this investigation so that we can collect the evidence and then fire the employee and refer him to law enforcement. So they were looking for an arrest to be made. So we said, great. We showed up at the company, myself and my business partner. We received the briefing on what this insider had been doing inside the organization. I looked at my partner, he looked at me, we looked at the client, and we said, you don't have an insider. You have Eastern European organized crime that is compromised in an account from an employee and are using that in a malicious way. And they said, well, how do you know? How do you recognize? Well, because we had spent so much time studying the attackers and how they operate, that we recognize those tactics, techniques, and procedures that the attacker was using. Now we instantly shifted the frame. We know who the attacker is, so we know what goal they're trying to accomplish. And given the nature of the company, this is a very large web hosting company, hundreds of thousands of clients. We said the best way for them to monetize this access is they're going to want to deliver malware to the customers, the web browsers that are hitting your web hosting client sites. So we need to immediately shift our attention. Let's forget about everything else in your network. Let's shift our attention to those assets because that's where they're going to go. And if they're not there yet, we can prevent them from getting there. Interestingly, somebody around the table raised their hand and they said, hey, we got a notification today from one of our US government clients. So it was a US government agency that was hosting their website with this company, saying that their site was delivering malware. And we looked at all of our configs and we're clean. So we figured it must be their code. It must be their website. I said, well, let's go to that server and see. And sure enough, that server had been compromised by the attackers and was being used to generate malware. And they were doing it in a way in which for us to resolve that particular risk, right, which was having what had huge consequence for this organization, you know, being compromised and delivering malware to their client websites. It was a simple command on the terminal that was able to remediate the immediate risk to all of their clients. So that was one where, by understanding the attacker mindset, by understanding what the attacker was going to target, and by prioritizing how we were going to respond to the incident, by looking at what we knew were the target systems first, we were able to mitigate what would have been an incredibly consequential attack for this organization. So thinking like an attacker can also provide a lot of value from a cyber defense and incident response perspective as well.
Great story, Matt. And you know, that reminds me another story that I want to share with you guys. Back in the day when I was working for a X company, I was doing some hunting on ATM malware, and then suddenly the news hit and said in Thailand these ATMs are spreading money overnight, and there were only news in Thailand about that issue. And when I started finding the same day, in the same morning, I had a sample in my hand that it was an ATM malware uploaded from Thailand. And I was looking at the news and everyone was quiet. Visa was quiet. The ATM vendors, as usual, they were quiet. No one knows about indicators of what is this, the different techniques, so that we can, you know, understand the way they break in and they are speeding out money in Thailand. So then later I realized this was in a specific malware that was actually interacting with the ATMs. So they break through the backend, they infect the computers, and the way the mules or the guys getting the money out physically from the ATMs, they were inserting a specific debit card with a specific number in order for the ATM to know that's the attacker and then speed out all the money in minutes. So following Matt's approach, once we realized the technique that was not spread out because no one wanted to talk about it, we spread out as company. We shared the indicators of compromise. We took a risk, a very high risk, because I remember my boss says, are you sure that this thing that you are reversing is the ATM malware everyone is talking about outside? Because if we come out with a blog and says we found it and it's not, it's gonna be totally bad for us. And I was like, you know, I'm Mexican. As I said, of course, yes, I know that's the malware. I was 60-70% because I only have few indicators of what have done. So anyways, we released the blog, and the next day the ATM vendor released the same indicators that we released. And then Visa took those indicators, organizations took those indicators, and then everyone started taking actions. But my point here is the indicators, the technique being used by these attackers. Before, we didn't know anything. We were like, well, there is no way for us to monitor. There is no way for us to detect, and there is no way for us to respond. So once we understood those indicators, trigger the different detection strategies, and that's what we understood the way these guys are doing it. And again, as Matt says, if that's in Thailand, but if we understand the way these actors break into a bank, the way they move laterally, the way they compromise the organization, then we can anticipate in a way the different techniques that they are going to be using those specific groups in our region.
Great, thanks, Dan. Hey, I think it would be good if you agreed to move to the Q&A. I noticed that we've got multiple questions coming in. So maybe I'll pick one. I believe, are we supposed to pick the questions and we'll just respond to them? Or do we have a official moderator? I'll pick a question. the first one I'll pick says, can we enable cybersecurity awareness in the organization so that everyone works in this understanding and thinking like attackers and protecting our environment? So that's a great question. Cybersecurity awareness is a great element that you need to be focusing on within your organization for a couple of reasons. One, because as Dan just mentioned, the attackers rely on human behavior. We like to talk about endpoints, and in the cybersecurity industry, we talk about, do you have CrowdStrike or do you have SentinelOne, or what is your endpoint? But we forget at the end of the day, the ultimate endpoint is the person sitting in the seat, right? It's the human being. So you need to have the cybersecurity awareness programs that focus on educating the employees around what risks exist. If they understand the consequences of these cascading attacks, then they have a little bit better of a security mindset. What behaviors you expect from them, and those include good behaviors and bad behaviors. And then also, I'm a big fan of building in an element of metrics around security awareness and training, either through gamification, incentivizing good behaviors, recognition, even badging, and the systems like that let people understand that they've progressed through the security awareness journey, instead of just always using the stick. A lot of security awareness programs they'll send out template phishing emails, and if you click on a phishing email, you wind up having to watch a 30-minute video as a refresher course. And we always incentivize any behaviors we don't want, but we don't incentivize the good behaviors. Also, now tooling exists where we can extract value from our devices and our logs and our network to understand which users represent a risk and do some tailored or focused training towards them as well. So definitely an element that needs to be incorporated, but make sure that you're not just giving your employees briefings and having them click next or having them watch a video. Make the program a little bit more interactive and incentivize the employees to have good security behavior.
I'm gonna take one. There is one at the beginning. I think we can pick every of those. I'm gonna take one that says, when do you recommend to use a breach and attack solution, and when should we hire a handcrafted APT simulation? What is the difference? I think the approach should be the same, but I think the key is the context. And I want to be straightforward, guys. If you hire a external company out of Mexico, that's fine. That's totally fine. Just you want to make sure that the different scenarios they are covering are contextualized. You don't really want to have a specific piece of ransomware that is very successful in US and Europe, as I said at the beginning, replicating into your environment. So it's fine you hire everyone everywhere. Just make sure that your exercise is region-based. Make sure that you ask them for scenarios based on the groups targeting organizations in the region, and those are the different ways they simulate those attacks or emulate those attacks. That's the first very, very important point, as I said, because you don't want to do techniques and tactics from other side of the world that doesn't even are being used in our region. Mexico is totally different way to break in. If we talk about physically, it's just totally different than in other places. So I think that would be my main. There are many other things in the between, but I think context-based, regional-based approach, you want to make sure that wherever you find those providers, make sure that those have these scenarios tied to Mexico. Ask them, hey, Carbanac. Ask them, Bandidos Revolution Team. They will say, hey, what is Bandidos Revolution? No, man. Do you know what is BRT? Bandidos Revolution Team breaking in Mexico? No, thank you so much. Next one. So regional based, very, very important thing.
Great. Let me, I'll respond to one here. The main difference between thinking like an attacker and thinking like a pen tester. Really, a penetration tester is looking for the existence of vulnerabilities that provide a pathway into the organization, right? Which is a valuable service that you can be providing. When you are red teaming or doing an attacker emulation, you are actually focused on the outcome. You're focused on the objective that's going to impact the business. So the decisions that you make are not just that a vulnerability exists. Should I exploit it? It's a vulnerability exists. Does it lead me down a pathway in order to be able to accomplish my goal? And what the goal that you're trying to accomplish is dependent on what type of business you're in, and also the attacker that you're facing.
Okay, there are many good ones. I have many that I want to pick. So let me pick one. Can technology do a good enough job, or we will always need experts? I think it's a combination, guys. Keep in mind, it's not about technology only, it's process, people, and technology. And let me give you an example. It's very, very common example. So let's think about there is an exercise, or there is an attacker in your organization that tries to break in and tries to infect your endpoint, any endpoint. And guess what? Your technology was successfully able to detect it and to block it. Technology, great. But what we talk about time to detect, right? That is blocked, but no one realized in the security operations center, the incident response team, whatever you want to call it, humans, processes don't trigger, and they don't realize that this was blocked. 3 hours later, the attacker comes in because he learned he was blocked, and then he find another way to bypass detection. In that scenario, technology works fine, but you didn't have a process in place to make sure that those blocking actions are actually being dealt into the time to detect scenario where you will realize, go and isolate that box out of the network. So that's a perfect example of combination between technology. They do their job. Obviously, not all the technology, that's another thing, but you always need processes in place. You need people to take actions on those scenarios. And also in these assessments, a very important point also is technology. Since we're talking about technology, that also will give you a really clear picture of EDR, NDR, CM, whatever. Are they doing their job in the right way? You know, are they doing their blocking? Because everyone's gonna say, I detect 0 days, right? I detect everything. That's not true, we all know. The question is, how bad is my technology compared to the other ones? These exercises, recurrent exercises, will give you a clear view in the technology side on how those technologies are making their job, how the processes are making the job, how the incident response, the SOC, everyone, how this together is doing their job in order to respond and detect to this kind of an attacks. I have another one. Most attackers try to find low-hanging fruit. When these attackers thinking leave me open on other not so basic attack surface fronts, not exactly. Depends on the attackers. Keep in mind we have advanced persistent threats, and the reason of that name, advanced persistent threat, is because there is a fully dedicated, highly sophisticated team of people paid on a daily basis to compromise your network. And those guys are not gonna use low-hanging fruits. They're gonna use advanced techniques, advanced recognition, profiling in order to have one hit successful one. So that is in that side. You know, and there are other organizations that definitely attackers can use low-hanging fruits. That's definitely a way to do it, but it depends on the target. And now, thinking about an attacker, you need to make sure that you take both ends. You also think about an attacker that is a script kiddie, that is just downloading tools, what we call in Mexico, herramienteros, that I hate those, not all those guys, those approaches. But anyways, so that's the mindset, hacker mindset. You need to take into account low-hanging fruit thinking and advanced persistent threat thinking. At the end of the day, the same thinking should cover all those aspects, depends on your organization.
Excellent. I apologize for that. We talk about the human element in security, and I spilt my water bottle. So the human always being the weakest link. Did you happen to mention the indicators to share with the board? Should we respond to that one?
I don't think
So I like Dan's framework from the beginning of the conversation. The best indicators to share with the board, obviously, you want to be tracking some of the metrics around the totality of the organization. So it's good to track vulnerabilities that exist, they're being remediated. How are you prioritizing them? And there are new ways in which you can prioritize the vulnerabilities that exist in your environment based on the risk to the organization, the severity of it, whether it's being actively exploited. You know, we now have governments like the US government that provide us with a list every week that says, here are vulnerabilities that we see are exploited. So understanding how they're prioritizing. But I still feel, from my perspective, that the best metric for the board to track is the one that Dan mentioned in his introductory remarks, which is the time to detect and the efficiency of the response. What we always want to see through red teaming or even real incidents is that the time in which we are detecting incidents within our organization is constantly decreasing. And what you're doing now is putting pressure on the attacker, you're increasing the cost of the attacker, and also the efficiency of the response. If you're telling the board, hey, we detected this attack, but it took us 6 days to remediate it, that's a big difference. Vice if you tell the board, hey, we detected this attack, and based on the tooling we have in place and the Security Operations Center, we were able to remediate it within a matter of minutes and reduce the risk to the organization. So those are two, metrics I think that are really good to focus on at the board level, is understanding that, the dwell time or decreasing the time to detection, and then also understanding the efficiency of the response, because it speaks to the capability of your team, of your partners, and the technologies that you've deployed.
there is one question at the beginning that we missed. It says, how can I establish mechanisms to keep safe every element of the company that is on the network if we work remotely? Oh, yeah, okay. So it's all about, as I said at the beginning, it's about threat modeling. Because at the end of the day, now we have people working remotely. Now we have different set of targets, different ways to, now people is infecting the AnyConnects, the Citrix, those different clients that you are using at your home, even your home routers. Everything is changing now in those different scenarios. So at the end of the day, every new environment, every new place, we need to make sure that that is put into the targets once you are doing these exercises, so that you can also cover those. And that takes me down to a multi-layer approach. That's very important to mention quickly, because sometimes when you do an exercise, there are companies that still think about, hey, you send a phishing email and I don't get compromised, done, I'm secure, thank you so much. Don't even try to move laterally in the organization. That's not a good approach. It's multi-layer approach, because tomorrow someone is going to be able to break into your network through the phishing. But what about the controls in place at the lateral movement phase? So you gotta make sure that you test every single aspect. It doesn't matter if the previous phase was not successful. You wanna make sure to test, to assess process, people, and technology in all those different phases and segments in your network.
Great. A question from Diego that says, assuming you know your vulnerabilities and recognizing you need to consider cybersecurity investment, is it better and cheaper to address these risks collectively rather than individually? Can you tell us more about the advantages of this approach? That's a little bit more of a complex question, so if I don't answer it, feel free to send a follow-up in the Q&A for certain. If you can invest in technologies that give you broad defense against the attacks that will be most consequential or even catastrophic for your organization, obviously those investments make sense. But having that focus on what is meaningful to your organization, I think, is what is the critical element to understand here. Let me give you two quick examples. One, dealing with a very, very large company in the United States, where I met with the board of directors, and they had a list of risks that they considered to be the top risks to the organization. And I had to go all the way down the list to number 7 before I got to cyber risk. So I went to the board and I said, hey, give me 3 examples of something that could happen to your business that would be incredibly impactful to the organization. You would lose a lot of money, you would lose a lot of customers, maybe it's even catastrophic. Maybe it's something where the survivability of the business is in jeopardy. And so they gave me 3 things. Well, if these 3 things happened, these would all be really bad. These are things that we stay awake at night and think about. And then we went and did a red team that was an adversary emulation to accomplish those 3 things via a cyber attack. And after demonstrating to the board that the things that they were most worried about happening to the business were actually most likely to happen from a cyber attack, it elevated cyber risk from number 7 to number 1 at the board. And then the approach and protection strategy that they were taking, making investments in, changed as a result. A second good example that I like to talk about is a very large firm that basically put a placeholder in the board budget of hundreds of millions of dollars for a future cyber attack. They were so worried about a cyber attack and about the vulnerability of their organization that they basically pre-declared a liability. So if you can imagine a board saying, we're going to put something on the books, for hundreds of millions that we think is going to happen in the future because of how poor our state of cybersecurity is. So I went and talked to the executive team and I said, well, what is your approach in order to reduce this liability? Because now we have a number, let's say it's $300 million. The board has said, we think a cyber attack is going to cost us $300 million in the next 2 years. What are you doing to reduce that liability? And they said, oh, well, we're deploying all these technologies and we're kind of trying to raise all ships up, at once and improve the overall enterprise network security posture. I said, well, of that 300 million liability, what percentage of systems in your network is that comprised of? Like, well, it really would only be these systems, these servers, and that's maybe 5% of our overall network environment. And it's 95% of the liability. It didn't make any sense for them to be trying to improve everything in the organization when 95% of their risk was concentrated in 5% of their systems. So often the business knows and understands how to prioritize. You just have to ask the right questions and make your decisions accordingly. So there is no right answer there. It varies from organization to organization, but it's a matter of making sure that you're asking the right questions about the consequences of the attack, but then also where is risk aggregated inside your network? What systems are most critical, most consequential from an attacker perspective that would be meaningful if compromised against your organization?
I think we have 4 minutes. Maybe we might try to take a couple of quickly, and then we can just finish. I want to take just 30 seconds on one, which is about sharing information, right? The question is, organizations are jealous of their information. How do we build that trust to share information? Totally agree. It's very hard. This is more a region-based approach and a challenge that we need to tackle. But I would just split it into 2 different strategies. First, you must have a trusted platform where all people involved, they trust in that. They trust how they can share information. They know this information is not going to leak information about their organization. They know that this is going to be probably a sample of a specific malware piece, probably, or indicators that we know is not going to be taken from everyone else but the people in that platform. So this trusted technology is very, very important. And the second thing is must be led by leaders in the industry. So this cannot be someone by own ways to try to come up with this approach. Must be led by banks, for example, by these huge organizations that they already understand the challenge and they can take the lead and do it in that specific way. That's the way, at least in my experience in US, is done. And actually you have a vouching mechanism where if a new people wants to jump in, there is a vouching mechanism where everyone votes about this new person, their bio, their curriculum, their industry, what they can sum up into this thing, and then is eventually approved or denied. So that trust of relation between people needs to be built, led by the leaders in the industry.
Yeah. And that is important, the collaboration and the information sharing, even through trusted intermediaries, in enabling a collective defense type model, right? Because I gain value if I am one organization that is suffering from, or that has a competitor that is suffering from an attack, or a peer in industry. I gain value from understanding how they're being attacked because I can use it to inform my defense. In the same way, they can derive some value in understanding how I'm being attacked. So there is this collective defense framework that is very valuable. We see it actually, implemented through cyber threat intelligence community and through vendors, and even formally in the US through organizations that we call ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, that actually facilitate that sharing of information and that enabling of a collective defense. So the threat-informed perspective also derives great value from that, that collaboration and cooperation. And it can be anonymized. You don't have to say it was my bank. You can find trusted intermediaries to sanitize and anonymize that information, but share it amongst each other.
I think back to you, Carlos Gonzalez, please. Rodney?
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Matt. We could stay here talking for hours on some of more of these topics. But thank you very much for all the insight and valuable information you shared with us today. I think you left to the audience very valuable knowledge on how to keep on raising the bar on the protection. So thank you again for your participation. We look forward to have you again attending our third module, which is going to be on November 15. And actually, we were going to be addressing some of the questions and providing further information in what is going to be the topic for that day. Is going to be cybersecurity for C-suite executives, and discussing how more important becomes to be aware at all levels of the organization, but particularly at board level. So sharing some of the trends and understanding how to keep on boosting all of these elements of security is going to be the topics that we will be discussing. And we will have fantastic panelists as well, with Jay Leak, the managing partner of SYN Ventures, and Roberto Dedmichuk, CIO of Ternium. So I look forward to see you next week. And thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone. Have an excellent day. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.